Hello, and thanks for joining us here at Blue Ridge PBS for another edition of What It Takes, where our goal is learning about our neighbors and the organizations that are deeply involved in the fabric of our community. I'm Tom Landon. My guest today is Amanda Stanley, the President and CEO of DePaul Community Resources. Amanda will share DePaul's work of ensuring the creation of what she calls no matter what families, no matter what. We'll discuss how children in foster care and individuals with disabilities can experience belonging and what it takes to make that happen in homes, communities, and systems. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
I'm so excited to have you here, and I guess because we led with that, you introduced me to this concept of no matter what families, no matter what. What do you mean by that, and how does that fit with what DePaul does?
So every night before I tuck my kids in to go to bed, I say to them, especially when they were younger, I love you no matter what. Right? And from an early age, they used to try to poke holes in this, and they would list egregious things that they could do or say or be to check.
Like what? What would they say?
Like hurt somebody really badly or do something that was really against my value system. I won't list examples. And I would say, yeah, I would still love you, right? Because we belong to each other. We're each other's people. And I believe, and DePaul believes, that everybody deserves to have that, right? What we mean by that really is that everybody deserves to have people with which there are no conditions, right? Nothing that would get in the way of them having love and safety and care and connection. And right now in Virginia, there are still populations for whom that isn't true, right? Children who experience trauma, who are in the foster care system, and individuals with disabilities, in particular, are the groups of people that we serve, because there are still conditions under which they do not get to experience safety and love and connection. And so our job is to help do something about that.
It's a pretty radical idea. You know, no matter what, that encompasses an awful lot. Before we talk about some specifics of your program and your organization, I always like to know, how did you get involved in this work? What led you to where you are right now? And why is it what you spend your time doing?
I studied sociology and art in college because those were two things that made a lot of sense to me. They were two classes I got A's in. And both of those really deal with how we create change in the world. Sociology was about the social context that really influences our outcomes in the world. And art for me was this empowering perspective that says you are a creator, you are a maker, and you can design things as a human being. And a pretty typical path after somebody studies sociology is to enter the social work world, which I did. And I worked with individuals and families to help create their way forward, right? Better outcomes for them. Over the course of my career, I found that better systems were needed for social workers to operate in to help make outcomes better for these folks. So I ended up serving on boards of nonprofits. DePaul was actually one of the boards I sat on. I fell in love with them and their mission. And after some time away from it, felt called back to do that work. And as CEO, what's really exciting is I get to design our system internally at DePaul to what I call clear the skies for our workforce so that they can do the very best job that they can do at serving the families that we take care of.
You got to meet with some of your folks at DePaul, and just really impressed with their commitment and also sort of the creative way you're approaching running a nonprofit like DePaul. We should probably take some time to say, what is DePaul Community Resources and what's its mission? How is that mission evolving?
DePaul was born back in the 70s in Roanoke. Actually, our vision statement is opening doors to hope and belonging. So it's a little ironic that we were born when doors closed to an orphanage here in town. And we were created to provide what we then called specialized foster care for the children who lived in that orphanage to make sure they had families that they could grow up in. Over time, we evolved to also provide services that wrap around those children and those families to make sure that what we put together stuck. And then several years later, when we saw that some of those children who had disabilities got to be older, aged out of our system, aged out of the education system, that there was really nowhere for them to go. Their options were to live in long-term care facilities or nursing homes. So there were people in Virginia who were 21 years old with disabilities whose limitations were such they required care their families couldn't provide to them, living in nursing homes. And our then
With
executive...
mostly elderly people, I would assume. Wow.
Yeah, and really confined, right? Unable to live fully in community. So our then executive director started what we call a sponsored residential program. And in the 80s, some funding became available called Medicaid waiver. So for people that were eligible for long-term care, it allowed them to access Medicaid without having to actually be placed in long-term care. So they could have the medical services available to them in a home setting at a lower cost and better outcomes. It was kind of a rare service at the time, but DePaul got into it because it was aligned with our mission that everybody have a home, regardless of their level of trauma or disability. So we've evolved over time to serve both of those populations.
The number 5,411 came up when I was just looking, Googling as you do, and that's the number of children in foster care as of January 1st.
In Virginia, yes.
Just in Virginia.
That's right.
And we know that kids in foster care, it is a place for them to be, but there's a lot of negative things that come with, in terms of what their outcomes might be. Higher teen pregnancy, higher drug use, all of the things that we try to limit. What is, when we talk about what good foster care looks like, what does that mean to you?
Good foster care looks like making sure, well, one of the things I love about foster care actually is that success can look about 100 different ways to kids. And the narrative I think we mostly hear of in the public is that a child is abused or neglected, kind of bad parents. They enter the foster care system, the good people swoop in, right? They get adopted and it's all better. That is a good outcome, and we've had a lot of outcomes like that at DePaul. Good outcomes can also mean that we provide services to their family of origin and they're able to go home safely. Good outcomes can also be, even with those children, right now in Virginia, about 25% of kids who are in foster care will age out, which means they will leave the system without a no matter what family. And even they have good outcomes. I was just reminded the other day of a young woman we've worked with, who we've stayed in touch with over time. She has created for herself a no matter what family, right? She is a partner who loves her in a safe relationship. She has gone to college. She is involved in a career that really fuels her joy and passion. And so she has found a way to be successful, kind of despite the odds that were stacked against her. So for us, all of those things are really potentially successful outcomes. But foster care is a hard experience for kids. It's never easy for them to be removed from their people, their family of origin, even if that family hasn't been safe for them. And it is in itself another trauma that they experience.
I mean, it's remarkably, when you talk about the formation of DePaul during the 70s or whatever, as orphanages were closing. I'm 58. I was definitely growing up during that time. It's hard to think that our society used to take children without parents or who were in a difficult situation, and you went to an orphanage, and to really blow that model up and turn over to a foster care system, that's a major, major societal change. I know you weren't at DePaul at that time, but put yourself in the shoes of trying to manage that seismic shift.
It's still hard, right? We still have congregate care settings. About 10% of the kids who are in foster care still reside in some sort of group or institutional setting. Much of that is because there aren't enough foster families who are willing to take kids who are difficult to place. I don't love that label.
Right.
It really just means that they've been through such trauma that some of the ways they express their emotions and their difficulties make it really hard for families to want to say yes to them. right? So there are still a group of kiddos, as I call them, in our state who are not only in a temporary foster care setting, but they're in a very temporary and institutionalized setting because of the difficulties that they experience. So it's still hard, it's still a challenge for us.
You just think about the life of a child in that situation where everything's an institution. You know, they wake up in a bed that's in a group home or a congregate setting. They go to a school, which is another institution. You know, there might be some sort of after-school program that they go to after, but it's still an institution. And there is that thing about having your own space, having your own room, having your own door, that really makes child development a lot better.
Right.
Right. I have asked everybody this so far in recent weeks because it's still on all of our minds. We're still living through it. COVID must have been really difficult for you. It's a very high touch you know, your business is very hands-on, literally.
That's right.
How did, you know, what was your response last March when everything kind of stopped? What did you say to your staff?
Wow. The honest answer is I was really pretty frightened when that was happening because, as you said, all of the work we do, all of the care we provide, including the care we provide to our staff, right? We take really good care of the people that work there because it's a high burnout field and we have the best of the best. I was really concerned that in an organization that provides really intimate, personal care where 90% of the work we do is in people's homes, right, in living rooms and kitchens, that somehow the way we cared for our staff or our clients would be jeopardized. So what we said to staff was we were going to do everything we could to make sure that wasn't the case, right, to make sure that our culture of care transcended the buildings that we were used to coming to every day. And we did that. Everybody became an innovator. You know, we had staff teaching all of us how to do some things online that we had only ever done in person. We had staff creating how-to videos and sharing them with everybody, including the leadership team. And all of our communication turned digital when we were a very paper-heavy organization in terms of how we told stories. What ended up happening really was that we saw a lot more clarity in communication. We saw a lot more access to each other, right? We have 16 locations around the state. And when we no longer had to get in a car and travel to see each other, we sort of became one entity instead of 16 little entities. Our IT department was incredible. So within a week, everybody in our organization had either an iPad or a laptop that they could use to connect so we could see people. We helped some of our families get technology ready so that we could connect with them online. Our therapists got really innovative about how to get kids to interact in therapy, which they were actually much better at than some of their parents were, as you can imagine.
Sure.
And after about a year, we actually did what we called a COVID impacts assessment. And we interviewed 100% of our staff with some questions to understand how that switch to remote work really impacted them and the people they care for. And what we found out was that for most of them, it was a positive experience. A lot of our staff have kids at home, and they were able to make that flexibility work. They were able to adapt to it and continue to care for themselves and their clients. We didn't see a dip in the quality of services that we provided, and we learned a lot about how resilient we were because we were tested in it in ways that we had never been tested before. It's really been even though it's been hard, especially through the crisis part, it's been really satisfying to see how our staff rose to that occasion.
So obviously a lot of the backbone of what you do depends on people willing to step up and become the closest thing to forever families they can become for these kids. I'm just going to give you the floor for a minute to convince those who are out there who maybe have thought about, maybe they've got some extra room in their house. Maybe they have some more time. Maybe they're now working remotely and could be home to take kids off the bus. What do you tell someone who expresses an interest in helping by being a foster parent?
I say ask the question, start the process. The process of becoming a foster family is long, and it is it's difficult, and it's that way by design, right? Because we want to make sure that it's a good fit for the family, that they meet the standards that are required in order to provide care in their home. And we want to make sure ultimately that they're able to provide environments that are healthy and safe and sustainable. I would also say be ready to be surprised by it. We have a lot of people come to us kind of afraid that they won't be able to do it, that these kids will require something superhuman that they don't have to offer. And that's not the case. We had a family not too long ago come in like that and got a placement very quickly, and very quickly realized that they had everything they needed to provide this child. And now they're on a path to adoption, right? Because we start with basic needs: a room, a place at the dinner table, the opportunity to help cook dinner, a birthday party where you get cake and ice cream, and somebody to listen to them when they get off the school bus and they had a really horrible day, right? I would say ask the question and start the conversations and see where you end up.
And I'm sure that even if someone cannot go there just yet, they don't have either their living situation doesn't allow it, or they're just not ready to be a foster parent. Are there opportunities for people to become involved with you all in a way that's beneficial to those who need the help?
We need lots of kinds of help. So we need staff. We're hiring right now. We need volunteers. We need donors. My advice to anybody who's listening to this and wants to help in some way and thinks, I can't have kids in my home, that's not going to work, is to learn. Go to our website, learn about what we do, and invite us in if you're a part of a church or a civic group or a school where we could come talk more about this. Because my experience is, once people learn about DePaul, once they learn about the needs of our population, they very quickly start to see where they fit into that story. And they very quickly understand, this is the way I can help, right? I have extra $25 a month that I can contribute. I have a little bit of time, I could be a mentor to a young person. So I think learning more is probably the first step to figuring out the best way to help.
One of the things that has struck me in reading about this just a little is the impact that poverty can have on the necessity for a family the cause of a lot of the reasons that kids don't have homes is poverty. Is there anything we can do, if we could wave a magic wand on the other end of things before people come and need foster care or adoption services? What are your thoughts on that?
My first thought is you're absolutely right. Poverty is really one of the largest and most consistent contributors to child maltreatment. So it is both a precursor to involvement in the foster care system, and sadly it's often a place children end up after they're in the foster care system, particularly if they age out of care without a family, without support. A magic wand for me would be thinking about our interventions in the foster care system as beyond interventions in the foster care system. And what I mean by that is, right now we've developed systems that remove children from their families, provide a lot of help to them to heal, and send them on their way. What we haven't done as good of a job in our government and our culture is also taking care of the parents in the home from which those children came, and doing what's necessary economically in our communities to alleviate some of that poverty and the context within which those families got in the situations that they're in. So I think there's a lot of work to be done legislatively to kind of connect those dots between child welfare and economic well-being.
Well, and I don't know what my own thoughts are on this, but I know of the way that in popular culture and sort of sometimes people in joking without thinking talk about call child protective services. There's a negative connotation to a lot of that work. When all of the social workers I've ever met in my life, their intentions are so good and so strong. And in many ways, when a child comes into your orbit, it is, for many of them, the chance of a lifetime, right?
Yeah, there's a real moral coloring to the work that we do, where I think we set up a dichotomy, especially in the way we talk about it, folks in and outside of the system, that the child is, the victim, and there are good guys and there are bad guys, and many times their family of origin is labeled as a bad guy. And what is more helpful, right, is a model that says these parents are partners with us. Because while they may have done some things that create unsafe environments, they are still experts in what their family needs to recover and get better. They are still experts in what kind of laundry detergent they use for their kids' clothes so that you can duplicate that in the foster home, and there's a little sense of familiarity when they arrive. So when we start to think about families of origin and the systems actually partnering together to help figure out what will make things better, even if the outcome isn't desirable for that mom or that dad, that's a much more helpful model forward for these kids than this setup of good guy, bad guy.
Sure, but nobody sets out to be a bad parent, right? And nobody thinks they will be a bad parent. And then they may not be bad parents, they're just parents with a lot on their plate. And that, I think, is, that reducing stigma is so important in so many. We could talk about 20 different topics in society today, and if we could talk about how we could reduce the stigma of people who have substance use disorder or who maybe never really learned how to be a good parent themselves, we'd be a lot farther along. Tell me about the Bridge to Hope program.
The Bridge to Hope program is fairly new at DePaul. It started last year when a donor called us and said, if I gave you $15,000, what would you do with it? And it was easy for us. Our staff have talked for years about the need for there to be funding that covers all the stuff that everybody else says no to. So the kids that we serve and the adults that we serve are eligible for Medicaid by virtue of the fact that they're a family of one with no income. And Medicaid provides a lot of help for them. It does not, however, provide non-clinical, non-codable, non-billable services, right, that exist outside the system. So if there's a mom who's trying to get her son or daughter back, and she's done all the therapeutic stuff she needs to do, and the thing that's holding it back is something as simple as having a working oven or new tires on her car or a better mattress in the bedroom, we can use the Bridge to Hope Fund to pay for those things, right? Things that no other real formal system will pay for, which really, to use the word again, bridge that gap between the reality of being separated for months and months and months and months, because that's a problem for her because she's living in poverty, and being able to go home pretty quickly, right? So it's really a step in the right direction for these kids who have funding that's really very limited around what it can help them do.
Well, and you talk about that, was it $15,000 you said, right? That's not a lot of money,
right,
organizationally speaking, but to
right,
have access to that unencumbered, what can we do with that money? That's
right,
that's probably, so I'm sure you'd like a lot of unrestricted funding.
We spent it quickly, as you can imagine, so what we've done now is establish that fund ongoing and invited our donors, especially our donors who really want to make a quick and tangible impact in the life of a child. You make a gift, and within a week we can tell you what happened to that money and whose lives you impacted. So we have kept that going as a way that our donors can contribute to the work we do.
Sure, and a way to trust the experts. You guys know what the needs are. Often grants and things are very specific about what you can do with that. We're at about 3 minutes left, a little less than that. You talked about your staff. Obviously you care for them a lot. What are some things you can do? It's a sad business you're in, and I know there's happy stories that come out of it, but what do you do to kind of support your staff to help them keep the eye on that and not just what was so horrible that they saw yesterday?
We provide a lot of opportunities for our staff to share stories with one another. We have lots of support for our staff to have time off. Not only do we provide generous time off, but we also have supervisors who are constantly giving them the message and checking in. How's your workload? What do you need to be well? We provide a lot of support in terms of training, because part of this is just kind of having the competence and capacity to know what to do when you get in really difficult situations. And we have special support for our supervisors who are right in the middle of it, right kind of in the hardest part, supporting the people who are doing the work and getting pressure from us, management people, about how to do that well. So we've created something called leadership learning circles that have been in place for several years now, where these supervisors get not only training and things like how to have difficult conversations, how to build a strong team, they also get coaching from professional certified coaches. They also get peer-to-peer support for one another so that they can talk about what's hard and get help for it.
And we're down to not very much time at all, but you hire a lot of new folks, right? They're probably like you, right out of school.
Right.
What's the advice you give to somebody when they show up to work on their first day?
Make connections with other people who do the work, because we will get each other through this. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, for the work your folks are doing. As we wrap up the program, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.